There is no point trying to negotiate with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Yulia Navalnaya, widow of the late Russian dissident Alexei Navalny, said at the Munich Security Conference on February 14. Navalnaya's comments come 2 days before the anniversary of her husband's death, which coincided with the launch of the 2024 Munich Security Conference. As US and Ukrainian officials gathered in Europe to discuss steps towards negotiating an end to Russia's war, Navalnaya warned against attempting to make agreements with Putin. "Even if you decided to negotiate with Putin, just remember he will lie," she said. "He will betray. He will change the rules at the last moment and force you to play his game." Days before this year's Munich Security Conference began, US President Donald Trump held separate calls with both Putin and President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump called Putin first on February 12, saying later that the two leaders agreed that negotiations to end the war in Ukraine will start immediately. Trump has repeatedly promised to strike a deal with Moscow that brings about a swift end to the war in Ukraine. "There are only two possible outcomes for any deal with Putin," Navalnaya said. "If he remains in power, he will find a way to break the agreement. If he loses power, the agreement will become meaningless." Navalnaya, who has emerged as a prominent leader in the Russian opposition movement in the wake of her husband's death, spoke at a conference panel along exiled Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya.
Following recent Ukrainian advances in Kursk Oblast, Russian forces have launched a hurried counteroffensive near Cherkasskaya Konopelka, aiming to halt Ukraine's progress and quickly retake lost territory. However, with Ukrainians carefully planning their defense, Russians might already be too late, as this Russian mechanized assault quickly turned into another disaster, according to Euromaidan press media outlet. Russia's goal is to avoid a prolonged battle by launching a quick counterattack to overwhelm Ukrainian defenders, forcing them to withdraw before they can establish entrenched defense positions. The Russians are in a race against time because if they allow Ukrainian forces to dig in along the Psel River, future Russian attempts to retake this ground will become increasingly difficult and costly. Euromaidan press says that well-prepared Ukrainian defenses, fortified positions and better supply routes could turn the battle into a long, attritional fight, something that has already caused a lot of problems for the Russian forces in the Kursk region, and Russian commanders know they do not have the spare resources for any more additional grinding battles. This is why they rushed their counterattack almost panicky, hoping to catch Ukrainian forces before they could fully consolidate their gains. To achieve this, Russian forces deployed armored vehicles carrying assault infantry, hoping to rapidly close the distance and engage Ukrainian defenders in close-range combat before drones or artillery could react. The frozen ground, created by sub-zero temperatures, provided an opportunity as it allowed Russian mechanized units to use field roads, giving them relative freedom of movement compared to previous muddy conditions. Additionally, the frozen terrain made it harder for Ukrainian forces to prepare defensive positions quickly, potentially exposing them to rapid Russian breakthroughs. Despite these advantages, the battlefield itself worked against the Russian assault. The Konopelka River created a natural funnel, forcing Russian vehicles and troops into predictable movement corridors that Ukrainian drones and artillery easily monitored. Furthermore, while the Ukrainians are now positioned further from Sudza, they enjoy concealed supply lines stretching from Sudza to Zamosti, Makhnovka and through the forest roads leading to Cherkasskoye Konopelka. This allows Ukrainian reinforcements and supplies to move safely and efficiently, hidden from Russian fiber optic drone strikes, while Russian supply lines remain exposed to potential ambushes. Moreover, ongoing battles near Ulanok prevent Russian forces from using their preferred supply route, forcing them to take longer and more vulnerable paths to reach the battlefield. With the flat, open terrain and clear weather, this logistical disadvantage made Russian movements highly visible to Ukrainian surveillance drones, according to Euromaidan press. Because of these factors, the Ukrainians immediately detected the Russian assault the moment it entered the funnel. Within minutes, Ukrainian drone operators launched waves of FPV drones at the advancing armored column. Geolocated footage shows Russian armored vehicles being hit by precise FPV strikes, with the lead vehicle exploding and blocking the road behind it. As soon as the infantry dismounted, they attempted to flee into a nearby tree line, hoping for cover. However, Since it is winter, the trees provide no actual cover or concealment, leaving them completely exposed as if in an open field. Ukrainian soldiers immediately called in artillery, with a single cluster munition strike from an artillery crew being enough to wipe out many of the bunched up Russian soldiers. Vampire drones then successfully finished off the remaining Russian infantry long before they could reach Ukrainian positions or cause bigger problems. This quick Ukrainian response turned this counterattack into a disaster for the Russians, whose rushed assault, predictable attack routes, and lack of surprise played directly into Ukrainian hands, leading to severe losses in both manpower and armored vehicles. London is outraged by the US president's attempts to conduct a direct dialogue with the Kremlin over the heads of Ukrainians and other Europeans. This is reported by the British The Times. I just had a long and very productive phone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's countries, Trump wrote on social media after a call to the Kremlin. Although British officials were braced for bad news, Trump's decision to call Putin first and leave Zelensky behind was a major blow. The Times reports. Worst of all, Trump later avoided answering a direct question at an Oval Office press conference about whether he considered Ukraine an equal partner in the talks. Some of us thought the Ukrainians did not fight for 3 years, losing their sons and daughters to be excluded from discussions about their future. I mean, if I were them, I would have the same message for Trump as those who were on Snake Island, an unnamed source at the UK Ministry of Defence told The Times, referring to the Russian warship slogan. The following day, London issued an official statement in which, in restrained language, it emphasized the inadmissibility of negotiations with the Kremlin bypassing Ukraine. However, an unnamed British official spoken to by the authors of the publication acknowledged that it was unlikely that any European country would be able to significantly influence the negotiations with Moscow until it agreed to deploy its own troops in Ukraine as peacekeepers. However, this does not mean that Europeans do not care. Trump's call to Putin is already being actively compared to the Munich Agreement of 1938, under which Britain and France gave part of Czechoslovakia to Hitler without asking Prague's opinion. Richard Coles, a conservative Latvian MEP, tweeted, Munich 2. Europe, brace yourself. Senior European diplomats said Trump and his administration had thrown Ukraine under the bus. One said key concessions were made up front, while another said it was disastrous. Weaken our position before negotiations even started. Why do this? Ukraine promised rare earths in exchange. What did Russia promise? Nothing. They continue with their imperial ambitions.